one real quick question that I'll address that somebody threw in, Carol, is are any of these schemes financially self-sufficient? No outside funding. This has been an issue for a while with these programs. So to answer that question, I think it's important to put it into the context of sanitation schemes worldwide. No sanitation scheme in the history of the world has been self-sufficient without outside funding. If you're reaching 100% of people across the city, you will have some sort of funding, whether that be public, private, there's funding coming from somewhere. None of these are completely self-sufficient unless you're only serving a certain portion higher up on the pyramid of financial incomes. If you're trying to reach 100% of people, including low income individuals, you will have to have some sort of subsidization. And it's one of those things that I think in the messaging around CBS early on, a lot of us that were involved in that probably made an error because we really did push this self-sufficiency message, and it's something that a lot of the organizations are continuing to try and reach. However, that is sort of the holy grail of all sanitation. And since no one has ever reached it in the past without only focusing on the highest income users, it's unlikely that that's able to be reached with some of the lowest income individuals in the world, right? But that said, it is something that is continually improving. And specifically over the last couple of years, a number of the organizations have reached positive margins, which is a huge step forward. That does not mean that they're completely self-sufficient, but you know, a lot of these are systems in developed economies are taxpayer funded and subsidized. So if you're really comparing apples to apples, that's not the question that you want to be asking. The question you want to be asking is what is the most cost efficient? And on that side of things, CBS compares really, really well. But with that, I will stop there and open up to a couple of questions for the panel. First, we've got Virginia Gardner, who's CEO of Luwat. We also have Naomi Korer, who is the product risk and research at Sanovation, and we have Lauren Hariff at Citywise Sanergy, and we have David Crossweiler, who's the co-founder of Sanitation First. And before we get really started, I want to throw it to Naomi real quick because she wanted to add in a little bit that wasn't covered in the sanitation video about what Sanovation is doing in terms of their urine reuse or urine processing. So go ahead, Naomi.
Yeah, thanks, Corey. So I thought it would be good to talk about what we've done with urine before. So the past 4 years here in Naivasha, Kenya, Sanovation has been providing container-based sanitation to households in a low-income settlement, but that has since been stopped. So what we did at that time is that we would collect the urine in 10-liter jerry cans, which sometimes would fill up before the servicing period was due. So most of the times people would have to take out the jerry cans by themselves and pour it into pit latrines that they used previously. And so what we tried with urine was to make struvite, and we had researchers come out to try and make fertilizer from using ion exchange processes for nitrogen recovery. So why we didn't proceed with urine resource recovery was mostly because of the alternatives in the market. So here in Kenya, the government provides subsidized fertilizer, which sometimes is even better than what you can get from feces or urine-derived fertilizer. So the cost is half of what you can offer to recover your costs. So that didn't make economic sense, and we didn't quite go ahead with that. And well, interesting enough is the logistics cost that would come with collecting urine and not using it at all. So we would take it and sanitize it by storing in a plastic tank in the sun for like 2 months and then infiltrate it. So the logistics costs for incurred and not using urine were not logical for the business. And so currently we have a pilot we are doing sponsored by the CDC that's providing CBS toilets in healthcare facilities. And this time we are not collecting this urine. So we are directly infiltrating the urine piped from the toilet to a leach pit. So it would be very interesting to hear what people do with urine, or what possibilities are there. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi. And I would also, so I'm going to just go through some of these questions. And so the first one I'm going to throw, there's a couple questions here for Luat, specifically around the film that they're using. This is a technology question. So Virginia, could you comment on what film material you're using for containing the waste, how the urine and feces is removed from this, what happens to that material? And then there was a follow-on question to that. You use anaerobic digestion for nutrient cut. There's some, technical question there. You might want to follow up with that one just via text, but if you could answer that first one, that would be awesome.
Yeah, sure. So our system uses polymer film, which comprises about 2% of the total waste stream that goes down through the toilet. And in general, we have used compostable polymer film materials that are made to the European standard of EN 13432, which have been separated out and sent for industrial composting. However, in more recent years, we've found that the cost of those materials in emerging markets contexts, such as Madagascar, but it does depend a lot on the context, are not permissible in terms of covering because our business model is covered through charges to households for the monthly service. And so we had to switch to PE film, which we send to an industrial company which manages it through incineration, along with other types of waste like medical waste and things like that within Madagascar. So in the Antananarivo context, that's not where we want to end up in terms of our solution. But in terms of the combination of life cycle and cost, it is really the only solution that we have right now. And so we've gone for what we see as the least worst option, which is managing the polymer film so that it does not go to landfill. At the same time, within Antananarivo, we're working with the waste utility SAMVA, who are planning an investment into energy from waste. So a higher class of incineration where there is heat recovery, because they, as you can imagine, have a widespread problem of plastic pollution all across the city. And so there is an opportunity, in a sense, for the polymer film management and the fecal sludge management to be brought into the same partnership with the utility. And that's where we're trying to go for Antananarivo. Here in the UK, we've worked with compostable films, which are sent to industrial composting. So that's the situation on the film. In terms of the anaerobic digestion, I don't remember what the question was, but in general, the value add for our system is that, and actually kind of what the film also enables, is that we can readily feed all of the organics to utility run anaerobic digestion systems, which is the preferred solution. And so the urine and feces together are going to the same place in our system, which we want to be anaerobic digestion, but in some cases will be aerobic systems, like the Organica one that I showed in the presentation, where they are still recovering nutrients. As far as I know, they have biosolids that come from that system, which is actually only septic and toilet waste. So they are recovering nutrients and spreading them to land somewhere in the Philippines on that one.
Thank you, Virginia. And I think I'll bundle a couple of these questions together. So Carol followed up with taxpayer funded programs. Are any of these organizations funded by municipalities or countries? And then that sort of goes to the point as to another question that was being asked. Are people working with local governments or water utilities? And Lauren had started to answer this in the chat. So I might throw it to Lauren to talk about what they're doing in Kenya. And then David, if you would talk about what you're doing in India, and then Virginia, if you want to comment on anything that LUWAT is doing. You mentioned a couple of the different partnerships you have, but maybe some other stuff with municipalities. All right, go ahead.
Sure. So I mentioned in the chat that Sanergy has a long history of working with the government, both in Kenya and in Nairobi, to work on policies that incentivize prioritizing sanitation and providing funding for it. One of those initiatives, we worked with stakeholders in Nairobi recently to put together what's called a ship flow diagram, which shows exactly how waste in Nairobi is and is not safely managed. And that's usually a great tool to start a conversation around what needs to happen next. And part of our goal with this is that we can work with the government to develop these policies, and then through our work, developing a more cost-effective system and working on the reuse products to offset the cost of that system, we can offer a really affordable alternative to some conventional methods. And then also the team that I work with in Sanergy is called Citywise, and we offer advisory services. So our goal is to partner, exactly like someone asked, with utilities and other organizations, governments who are interested in exploring different options for non-sewerage sanitation. And we're applying what we've learned in Nairobi into those contexts. Can't remember who was supposed to follow me. But...
That was me, I think.
Okay, sorry, go ahead, David.
So there's a couple of things here. Firstly, I'll actually use eco-sanitation as an example, because one of the issues we face is what people aspire to. And people aspire to a Western standard WC, which is a flushing unit, which has water. And I know that when they did they did a survey of some people at eco-sanitation, and basically they said, what do you think of your toilets? And they're all UDDTs. And the people said, they're really good, but we want a flushing toilet like the white guy has up the road. And that's one of the issues we face in India, where if you go to government offices, they've got flush toilets. If you go to, like the Indian government has just built a 90 million poor flush toilets because they're understandable, they're cheap on the surface, they're cheap. And so there isn't the political will to want to look at alternatives. And I think that's a big problem that we all face as you know, we are a relatively small bunch of people. And how do we impact enough on the people that make decisions at a much higher level so that non-sewer sanitation becomes the norm, becomes part of that mix? And at the moment we're not. And the closest we ever got was agreeing with Chennai Municipal Corporation to put in 100 non-sewered sanitation units to service 5,000 people. And it just fell to pieces actually while we were ready to sign an agreement, simply because there was so much doubt in their mind as to how it would compare to flush toilets. And that's one of the real big problems we face all the time.
Am I supposed to go next?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, sorry. I realized I also left off another question that was right, that was on the previous, but it's linked to how we collaborate with utilities. So we have a machine which separates polymer film from the organic waste stream so it can be pumped into utility run systems. And the utility partners that we've been working with include the SAMVA in Antananarivo, which has a network of decentralized anaerobic digesters around the city, which includes the one that we've built. And then there are 5 others that are more basic kind of DWAT style anaerobic digesters. In the UK, we've worked with Thames Water Utility using the same technology. And we're starting a project in the Philippines working with the utilities in Manila, which are Maynilad and Manila Water. Again, it's the same kind of toilet to treatment system for all of those. And the concept being that we can provide equipment that can help utilities and municipal service providers roll out non-sewered solutions that people will enjoy using in urban environments that lack sewers.
Thanks, Virginia. So I think what I'm going to do here is try and group a couple questions together. Kim had asked, she was curious about how the CBS formed and what the benefit to each of the organization is, and then how the pandemic has impacted services provided by the different organizations. So just as a quick, what the organization was formed in late 2016. And at this point, what we're looking at is about 153,000 people across the different organizations served each day. And what you're looking at is a number of, we've seen quite a bit of growth across that. And I noticed Elizabeth had earlier asked during one of the earlier presentation areas, why we're not seeing things go to scale and that sort of thing. And CBS has been one of those things that, you know, in terms of the problem that's out there, the billion people, several billion people that need sanitation, we're still a drop in the bucket, but we've seen remarkable growth within this sector over the last couple of years. But I think what I'd rather do right now is throw it to each of the individuals. So we'll go Naomi, Virginia, David, and then Lauren. If you could just talk about at each of your organizations, how the CBSA sort of aspect is useful for your organization, and then also about how the pandemic specifically has impacted your services and your organization.
Thank you. So I would say for how the CBSA has helped Sanivation, because if I think this, everyone can relate to this from your different contexts, that governments have not been quite focused on non-sewered sanitation. So having like-minded people and exchanging tips and challenges and how to go about things has really helped being in an alliance where people understand the problem and have like a thought process of how to address the problem. So I think things have evolved for us very much from the CBSA point of view of sanivation, from container-based sanitation, to a wider perspective of how you can increase the amount of safely managed sanitation in cities around here in Kenya. So it's gone to beyond the containment to the whole of the sanitation value chain to treatment. There's so much need along the sanitation value chain that has been unlocked just by starting out with container-based sanitation. So how it has been for us during the pandemic, it's not been easy, mostly because these setups are mostly reliant on funding, external funding. So with funding coming to a halt, kind of, and funds being relocated to COVID-19 response, it's not been easy transitioning. And well, with us closing out the CBS because of the just hardships in scaling and providing the service, and it wasn't profitable, like it wasn't scalable. So I wouldn't say it's been easy, but it has given us a chance to sit down and re-strategize and think about the next few years. What do we want to be doing in this sanitation space? Yeah.
Virginia.
Oh, sorry, I'm next. So wait, should we just go straight to the pandemic? Because it's been quite interesting in China. Yeah, so, what's been happening in terms of our rollout in Madagascar, we've actually been steadily increasing toilet numbers since we started shipping the new model of the home toilet at the end of last year. So we've currently got about 320 toilets on the ground, and we're increasing every week. And the agreement that we have with the utility to access all of that digester capacity really means that we have a scalable opportunity in terms of rolling out the household service. I think that if Luwat, I think it would look very different, and I think also be a very challenging model if we were trying to invest CapEx repeatedly to build treatment systems as we did for the first treatment system, which was really like an R&D funded system, because it was using the pasteurization system to convert the human waste, the effluent from the digester, into a safe fertilizer product. When we look at the business model, we really separate out the home service. We think that the home service needs to be sustainable in and of itself, based on people wanting to pay to have a good toilet at home, basically to cover the OpEx of the system. And then we separate out within our Madagascar operation the conversion of digestate into fertilizer and the sale of fertilizer. So they've just in the past, I would say 6 months, started to generate a really steady revenue stream from the fertilizer sales. We're still analyzing kind of the volume and sort of where that could potentially reach break even based on the operation of that one facility. And again, the sort of overall scalability of that is something that would require more investigation. The pandemic has actually been problematic in one regard for us, which is that it kind of slowed down the acquisition of new customers during the time when the city was in lockdown, and it just slowed down everything in terms of progress of operations. But it took only a matter of a couple of, not even a day, I don't think, actually, for our service to be qualified as essential after the lockdown. So we didn't need to pause operations. We had to invest in more PPE. And we had COVID cases in our team. Thankfully, we've had them in our teams both in London and in Madagascar, including myself. But thankfully, none of them have been serious. Yeah, that's kind of how it's been for us now. And the lockdown has been lifted in Madagascar. But I think that it has caused a lot of sickness and death as well, unfortunately.
So with regards to the CBSA, in the UK, there was a discussion on the radio, and it said that there's a water sewage company in the Midlands called Severn Trent, and the guy was explaining that if we extracted all of the potassium from our toilet waste, we would have 60% of the potassium needed in farming in the UK. And I think that it's things like that that I'm hopeful that by working together with others, we can start bringing to the fore to show that there is an economic opportunity, maybe to begin with this, extracting it from the traditional flush toilet, but that it would become easier as time goes on if people could adopt a more non-sewage approach, which gives rise to what might be able to happen in the future. And it's also nice being together with a group of people who are doing the same sort of thing, so you don't feel you're the only person having the same sorts of problems. You know, that's very sometimes quite reassuring that others are having hassles. And CV19 for us has been a nightmare in India. We work in Tamil Nadu, which is one of the hardest hit areas. I mentioned in the presentation, actually the plus side of it is that whereas we had guys going out collecting the crates, taking them back to the compound, the users are actually taking the crates, storing them, and they're sitting there and composting. So the users have got much more involved. We've actually got a lot of users come back to using our units, which we expected, which is all to do with the end of the Swachh Bharat construction process. And you have a lot of new toilets which were working really well, and we expected them to fall into disrepair quite quickly, which is what started to happen. And so we've had people coming back. So it's been really difficult, and we wait to see what's happening, what's going to happen on the other side, because our people still aren't going out because it's too dangerous. But ask me in 3 months' time and I'll tell you what the impact is.
Okay, so I'll jump in. I think as far as the CBSA, I think our answers are similar to the other panelists that have spoken already. It's been a great opportunity to have shared learnings and like-minded organizations who are doing similar things, trying things, finding the same failures, the same successes, and learning from those so that we're not all repeating them constantly. I think the bit that Corey mentioned in the video about shared research has also been really exciting. I was involved in a project to look at the climate impacts of container-based sanitation, and it was, I think, tremendously more efficient that we were able to look at CBS as a whole and then look at the parts that were individual to each organization, but to really embrace the parts that were the same so that we could do a unified analysis from that. For COVID-19, Sanergy has been continuing operations throughout the pandemic, similar to what Virginia said with Luwat. We pretty quickly were established as an essential service. That was a concern up front, was that if the country shut down, the city shut down, if we were not explicitly considered essential, that we could somehow be forced to stop operations, but that didn't happen. And actually partially due to our ties with the government, which we were talking about before. And then since we were able to continue, actually collections have increased during the pandemic, and that's because more people are staying home. They're using the toilets in their homes and around their homes. And so we've actually increased collections, of course, with increased safety protocols, safety training for our collectors, increased PPE for everyone. And I think I saw in the chat that Sean mentioned something about funding for hand washing, which is something that Sanergy has also been involved in some initiatives within Kenya to improve hand washing. And that's allowed us to provide soap and hand sanitizer to all of our Fresh Life operators, which has been really exciting so that they can actually offer, the Fresh Life toilets can also act as hand washing stations within the community to improve hygiene access. And I think that's it for me.
All right. So Kim, I think we're at time now. So if you want, I'll go ahead and wrap things up.
Yes, I think that's a good idea.
Okay, perfect. I'll try and go ahead and answer some more questions on the chat as we go forward. And if you have more questions, please feel free to email the folks that were on here or other organizations within the CBSA. And you can email me as well. I'll try and answer as many of those questions as I can. The other thing is, if you're interested in, if you're interested in starting a CBS organization, or you have one that's running and you're interested in getting support, please feel free to reach out to us at the CBSA. We have a number of different resources that we're developing and are available. Part of the goal of the CBSA is to propagate new organizations doing CBS in other parts of the world as well that can benefit from the learnings of the individuals that you've had a chance to talk with here today. So thank you very much. And thank you to our panelists, David, Lauren, Naomi, and Virginia.
And also, I just want to thank Isabella, who's on the screen as well here from the CBSA. She is working with Corey for the administrative and organizational part of that. So a shout out to you for for being here with us today as well.